Tonight, federal agents have raided a luxury compound linked to a foreign government. Billions seized, arrests made, and a governor in custody.
At 11:47 a.m. Central Time, in a fortified briefing room beneath the federal building in downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Deputy Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement stood before a wall of screens and delivered 6 words that would shake the upper Midwest to its core. We have identified a state-sponsored cartel. Not a drug ring, not a smuggling operation. A cartel, Venezuelan, political, military grade, operating in plain sight across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas for more than 4 years, tied directly to the Maduro regime, laundering an estimated $8.7 billion through luxury real estate, green energy shell company, and nonprofit refugee foundations, moving fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine through migrant transit network. And at the center of it all, one man, Governor Edwin Solberg, the progressive icon who had championed open-door migration policies and called federal enforcement fascism in badges. This is the story of how federal agents tore down a narco-political empire hidden in the American heartland, and how they discovered that Minnesota had become a cartel fortress for a foreign dictatorship. If you think corruption only happens on the border, keep watching, because what ICE and the DEA found beneath the snow will redefine what infiltration really means. 4:32 a.m., Adena, Minnesota, Hennepin County, February 9th. The streets are silent. Frost clings to the windows of sprawling estates. A thin layer of fog rolls over the frozen lakes. In the pale glow of streetlights, nothing moves, nothing stirs. But below the surface, 37 federal vehicles are closing in on a single target. A $14 million lakeside mansion registered to a shell corporation called Nordic Horizons LLC. On paper, it is owned by a Swedish green energy investor. In reality, it is a command bunker for Cartel del Norte, a Venezuelan narco-political syndicate operating as an extension of the Maduro government. And tonight, ICE Special Operations, DEA Strike Force Delta, and FBI Counterintelligence are about to breach it. At exactly 4:32 a.m., black Suburbans roll to a stop 3 blocks out. Agents in tactical black move through the frozen yards like shadows. SWAT teams take position along the tree line. Snipers post on neighboring rooftops. Black Hawk helicopters hover 2 miles out. Rotors muted. Thermal imaging locked on the target. The mansion has reinforced steel doors, bulletproof windows, surveillance cameras on every angle. A private security team inside. This is not a safe house. This is a fortress. At 4:34 a.m., the breach begins. Flashbangs shatter the silence. The front door explodes inward under a hydraulic ram. Agents pour through in waves. Federal agents on the ground, hands behind your head. Gunfire erupts from the second floor. 2 cartel guards armed with automatic rifles open fire down the staircase. SWAT returns, suppressing fire. 1 guard goes down. The other tries to run through a side corridor and is tackled by an ICE tactical officer before he reaches the panic room. Inside the basement, agents find what they were looking for. Rows of server racks, encrypted hard drives stacked floor to ceiling, steel lockboxes containing $4.2 million in cash, bundled in vacuum-sealed bricks, and something else. Something that makes the lead agent freeze in place and call for immediate forensic backup. A wall-mounted digital map of the United States, marked with over 200 glowing red dots. Each one represents a cartel-linked location, safe houses, transit hub, logistics centers, money laundering fronts, spread across Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Illinois. And at the top of the screen, in bold white letters, the operation's codename, Project Tundra Shield. This was not a cartel hideout. This was the nerve center of a foreign narco state's American expansion. 9:14 a.m., FBI Cybercrimes Division, Minneapolis Field Office. Forensic analysts are hunched over monitors, cracking encryption layers on the seized hard drives. What they find in the first 2 hours changes everything. Shell company, dozens of them. Nordic Horizons, Great Plains Energy Solutions, Twin Cities Humanitarian Fund, Upper Midwest Logistics Partner, now all registered in Delaware, all linked to offshore accounts in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Caracas, all funded with Venezuelan government money funneled through fake contracts and humanitarian grants. But the money is not staying offshore. It is coming back into Minnesota real estate, into green energy startups receiving state tax credits, into nonprofit organizations partnered with the governor's office to resettle migrants and refugees. And then the analysts find the transfer logs. Over $1.3 billion moved through these accounts in the last 18 months. Payments coded as consulting fees and grant disbursements. But the timestamps match something else. The arrival of Venezuelan migrant convoys. The scheduling of ICE enforcement stand-downs, the authorization of state-funded legal defense for cartel operatives detained by local police, and every major transaction is digitally signed by the same encrypted key. Authorization: ES-7 Executive Override. ES Edwin Solberg, Governor of Minnesota. The lead analyst leans back in his chair and exhales slowly. This is not corruption, he says quietly. This is command-level collusion. Because the evidence is undeniable. Governor Edwin Solberg did not just accept cartel money. He authorized cartel infrastructure. He built Cartel del Norte into the logistics backbone of the upper Midwest. He turned Minnesota into a protected narco-political hub for a foreign dictatorship, and the operation was designed to be permanent. One of the files contains a master plan labeled Phase 3, Continental Consolidation. It outlines the transformation of Minnesota into a hemispheric smuggling gateway, routes connecting Venezuelan cartels to Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, and beyond, migrant smuggling corridors disguised as refugee resettlement program, human trafficking pipelines masked as humanitarian transit, and billions more in narcotics moving through the heartland under state protection. The forensic team leader turns to the FBI liaison and says the words, "Every agent dreads." This goes deeper, and it is not over. 6:03 a.m., February 10th, Joint Operations Command Center, Minneapolis. A massive digital wall displays a live tactical map. Red markers pulse across Minnesota and the surrounding states. Each one represents a known or suspected Cartel del Norte site. Over 140 locations. Some are luxury estates, some are warehouses, some are farmhouses in rural counties, some are offices in downtown Minneapolis disguised as immigration legal clinics. This is not a raid, this is an eradication. At the center of the room stands the ICE Regional Director, flanked by DEA special agents in charge and FBI counterterrorism leadership. Behind them, U.S. Army National Guard commanders coordinate logistical support. Overhead, Department of Homeland Security drones stream live feeds from the skies. The operation is called Iron Tundra. Over around 200 federal agents, 73 SWAT teams, Black Hawk helicopters from Fort Ripley, armored convoy units from the Minnesota National Guard, coordination with Wisconsin State Patrol, North Dakota Highway Patrol, and South Dakota law enforcement. And offshore, a U.S. Navy destroyer positioned in the Great Lakes region to intercept any suspected cartel vessels attempting to flee through shipping lanes. At exactly 6:05 a.m., the operation launches. Teams hit simultaneously across 6 states. In Bloomington, ICE and DEA breach a luxury penthouse overlooking the Mall of America. Inside, they find 320 kilograms of cocaine hidden in false bottom furniture, $2.1 million in cash, and encrypted phones containing direct communication with Venezuelan intelligence operatives. In Rochester, a rural farmhouse is stormed. Agents discover a methamphetamine superlab producing over 50 pounds per week, industrial-grade chemical tanks, cartel chemists from Maracaibo, and shipping logs showing distribution to Chicago, Milwaukee, and Detroit through agricultural trucking routes that bypass weigh stations using falsified state inspection permits. In Duluth, near the Canadian border, a migrant smuggling hub is raided. Over 60 Venezuelan nationals are found locked in basement holding cells. They were told they would receive asylum processing. Instead, they were held for ransom. Families back in Venezuela were extorted for thousands of dollars. Those who could not pay were forced into labor or trafficking network. In St. Cloud, a nonprofit called New Horizons Refugee Services is revealed as a cartel front. Federal grants totaling $18 million were funneled into the organization over 3 years. The money never went to refugees. It went into encrypted accounts controlled by Cartel del Norte Financier. The executive director, a former advisor to Governor Solberg, is arrested on site. In Mankato, a logistics warehouse is breached. Inside, agents seize 840 kilograms of fentanyl, packaged and ready for interstate distribution, enough to kill millions. The warehouse was operating under a state contract to store emergency medical supplies. The contract was signed by the governor's office. And in Minneapolis, at a downtown high-rise, federal agents arrest Governor Edwin Solberg as he attempts to board a private helicopter on the rooftop. He is carrying 2 duffel bags. One contains $900,000 in cash. The other contains falsified passports under 3 different names and a satellite phone with direct lines to Caracas. He does not resist. He does not speak. He only stares at the agents with cold, defiant eyes. By noon, the seizures are staggering. Over 2.4 tons of cocaine, 1.1 tons of methamphetamine, 840 kilograms of fentanyl, including 2.7 million fentanyl pills, over $47 million in cash, 43 vehicles, 17 properties, and more than 200 arrests, including cartel operatives, corrupt officials, and complicit business owners. The underworld of the Upper Midwest took more damage in 6 hours than it had in the last 6 years. But the worst revelation was still to come. 11:32 a.m., February 10th, seized server analysis, FBI Minneapolis. Investigators are combing through the internal communications seized from the mansion and the governor's office. What they find is a betrayal that cuts deeper than money or drugs. Cartel del Norte had not just bribed officials. They had embedded themselves inside law enforcement. 47 officers across state patrol, county sheriffs, Minneapolis Police Department, and even ICE field offices, all compromised, all on cartel payroll. Payments ranging from $5,000 to $80,000 per month, depending on rank and access. The logs show how it worked. Before federal raids, cartel informants inside law enforcement would leak operation schedules. Routes would be altered. Targets would vanish hours before the breach. Evidence would be lost in transit. Witnesses would recant. Arrest records would be scrubbed or delayed. One email sent from a deputy chief in the Minnesota State Patrol to a cartel coordinator reads, ICE sweep scheduled 02, 03, sectors 4 and 9. Stand down until 0205. Will confirm window. Another message from a senior judge in Hennepin County approves the release of 12 cartel operatives detained on trafficking charges. Bail set at $500. All 12 vanish within 48 hours. Honest officers, the ones who tried to investigate, were reassigned, threatened, in 2 cases, forced into early retirement. One Minneapolis detective who flagged suspicious activity in the governor's office was placed under internal investigation for misuse of department resources. He was cleared 6 months later, but by then, the trail had gone cold. What ICE and the FBI uncovered was not a few bad apple. It was a second enforcement system, a parallel structure designed to protect the cartel and eliminate threats to Project Tundra Shield. One federal agent, a 22-year veteran, sits in the command center reviewing the evidence and says it plainly. They did not infiltrate the system, they rebuilt it. And the most chilling part? The cartel had contingency plans. If federal enforcement ever came too close, the operation would fracture into dozens of smaller cells and go dormant. Then, 6 months later, it would reemerge under new names, new routes, new politicians. Minnesota was not just infiltrated, it was redesigned to be a permanent narco-political safe zone for Cartel del Norte and the Maduro regime. February 11th, the Continental Web. But Minnesota was never meant to stand alone. As forensic teams continue decrypting files, a larger picture emerges. Project Tundra Shield was only one node in a hemispheric network. Cartel del Norte had established similar operations in 12 other states: Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. Each state had its own shell network, its own compromised officials, its own drug distribution pipelines. The investigators find shipping manifests showing how the cartel moved narcotics across the country. Cocaine from Miami and Houston was transported north through interstate trucking firms registered as food distributors. Methamphetamine from cartel super labs in rural Minnesota was shipped east using fake agricultural suppliers. Fentanyl pills manufactured in hidden labs were distributed through pharmacy wholesalers that had been infiltrated by cartel-linked financiers, and the operation was protected at every level. Way stations were timed to close for maintenance when cartel convoys passed. State border inspections were relaxed under executive orders signed by governors like Edwin Solberg, all citing humanitarian concerns or efficiency improvements. Trucking contractors with cartel ties received preferential contracts through state procurement systems. One document outlines a plan called Operation Northern Crescent, designed to transform the Great Lakes region into the primary distribution hub for Venezuelan narcotics entering the United States. The goal was to move over 15 tons of cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl per month through the Midwest corridor without triggering federal alerts, and it almost worked. The cartel had even begun infiltrating port cities on the Great Lakes. In Duluth, shipping companies tied to Cartel del Norte were moving narcotics hidden inside commercial freight for Canada. In Cleveland, warehouse facilities were used to repackage drugs before distribution to East Coast markets. In Chicago, a network of cartel-controlled logistics hubs coordinated movements across 6 states. The federal agents realize they are not just dismantling one operation, they are shutting down an entire shadow economy. But the most disturbing revelation comes from a file labeled Phase 4. Political expansion. Cartel del Norte had plans to fund political campaigns across 10 additional states. They intended to place compromised candidates into governorships, state legislatures, and congressional seats. The goal was to build a political firewall around their operations, ensuring that any attempt at federal enforcement would be met with legislative resistance, public protests, and legal challenges. They were not just running a drug empire, they were building a narco-state within the United States. One FBI analyst looks at the screen and mutters, "They were not hiding, they were governing." February 12, 3:47 p.m. Protests erupt outside the state capitol in St. Paul. Thousands gather. Some wave American flags and demand accountability. Others hold signs reading, "Justice for Minnesota and no foreign cartels on our soil." News helicopters circle overhead. Local police form barricades. Federal agents stand by in armored vehicles. But not everyone is protesting cartel. Some are protesting the arrests. A coalition of activist groups, many funded by organizations later revealed to have received cartel money, accuse ICE and the DEA of targeting vulnerable migrant communities. They call the operation a militarized crackdown and demand the release of detained individuals. They chant slogans. They block streets. They refuse to acknowledge the fentanyl, the trafficking, the billions in laundered blood money. And in that chaos, the truth becomes clear. Cartel del Norte did not just buy politicians and cops. They bought narratives. They weaponized language. They turned enforcement into oppression, accountability into racism, and investigation into persecution. They built a shield of righteous anger around their empire so that anyone who questioned it could be labeled a bigot or a fascist. But the federal agents who spent months unraveling this network are not swayed. They have seen the evidence. They have walked through the fentanyl labs. They have freed the trafficking victim. They have read the financial logs. They know what this was. And so do the families who lost children to cartel drugs, the neighborhoods that watched their streets turn into war zones, the honest officers who were silenced for doing their jobs. This was not about immigration. This was about infiltration. This was not about policy. This was about power. And power, when left unchecked, does not need violence. It only needs silence, ambition, and a population willing to look the other way. One mother, who lost her 17-year-old son to a fentanyl overdose traced back to Cartel del Norte pills, stands outside the Capitol holding his photograph. She does not shout. She does not chant. She just holds the picture high so everyone can see his face. And in that moment, the noise fades. Because no slogan, no narrative, no political spin can erase the reality of a life lost. Governor Edwin Solberg now sits in a federal detention facility awaiting trial on charges of racketeering, conspiracy to commit narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and acting as an unregistered agent of a foreign government. If convicted, he faces life in prison. Cartel del Norte's infrastructure in the United States has been dismantled. Over $8.7 billion in assets have been frozen or seized. Hundreds of cartel operatives have been arrested or deported. The corrupted officers and officials are facing their own reckonings in courtrooms across the Midwest. But the scars remain. The fentanyl that flooded through Minnesota killed hundreds. The methamphetamine destroyed families. The cocaine poisoned communities. The human trafficking shattered lives. The money laundering corrupted institutions. And the political collusion eroded trust in the very systems designed to protect the people. This story is fictional, but the systems it portrays are real. The tactics are real. The vulnerabilities are real. Cartels do not just smuggle drugs. They smuggle influence. They buy elections. They fund movements. They embed themselves into governments. And wait. And when the moment is right, they turn democracies into distribution hubs. If you are still watching, tap like so more people see this story. Share it. Comment, expose if you believe corruption must be dragged into the light. Because stories like this, even when fictionalized, are warnings. And warnings are only useful if people listen. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it whispers through policy, through grants, through speeches about compassion and progress. And by the time you realize what has been built in the shadows, the foundation is already set. Minnesota was almost lost, but federal agents, honest cops, and determined investigators fought back. They tore down the drug empire. They exposed the traitors. They reclaimed their state. But the fight is not over. It never is, because cartels adapt, politicians lie, systems fail, and the only defense against infiltration is vigilance. The Drug Enforcement Administration, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the FBI, and the U.S. Army worked together to dismantle one of the most sophisticated narco-political operations ever discovered on American soil. They seized tons of drugs, tons of narcotics, billions in blood money, and dismantled a criminal network that reached from Caracas to the heartland. But for every cartel fortress they tear down, another is being built somewhere else. For every drug tunnel they collapse, another is being dug. For every corrupt official they arrest, another is being recruited. Stay awake, stay informed, and never stop asking who benefits when the rules are bent. Because the answer to that question will always tell you where the real power lies. This has been a fictional dramatization, but the lessons are true, and the threat is closer than you think. The Mexican cartels, the Sinaloa cartel, CJNG cartel, and now Venezuelan syndicates like Cartel del Norte are not distant problems. They are here, operating in plain sight, waiting for the moment when we stop paying attention. Do not give them that moment.